When we East Anglicans be set to do a thing, we be set firm. We come at what we want by slow thinking and also being born staunch. Men and women alike, from the time we go afloat as youngsters until the time we are drowned, our lives are spent in fighting the North Sea. For God in His cruelty has set more traps to kill seafarers off this easterly outjet of England, I do believe, than He has set anywhere else in all the world. What it has done for us fishermen you can see when the spring tides bear it and show black scraps of old boats wrecked there, and sometimes a gleam of sand-whitened bones. Sometimes, by a twist of chance that you may call a miracle, the sea has a fancy for casting one or two ashore alive. My little Tess came to me a sea upcast after one of our great northeaster gales. I myself found her lying where the waves had landed her on the shingle, and where they had left her with the fall of the tide. I was a bit of a lad myself then, going on to be 8 years old. Storms had no fright in them for me in those days. There had been no chance for a rescue, the ship being deep down in the sands and all her people swept out of her by the time that daylight came. And so I bolted my breakfast and was off down the cliff path to see what I could find. All the other Southwold boys were hurrying that way too. John Heath, who lived close by us, came down the cliff path at my heels. I gave a shout and made a dash for a big white bundle that was lying in a nook off the shingle just above the lap of the waves. In a good deal of a hurry, I got the sheets loose. It was knotted at the corners, and then lying a little live baby. It looked up into my face with its big black eyes, and it blinked them for a minute and then smiled at me as if I'd just waked it up. John Heath burst out laughing. But I loved my little Tess from that first sight of her. So I wrapped her up again as well as I could in her blankets and set off for home. In the doorway my mother was standing, and I put the bundle in her arms. "Mother," said I, "it's a little beautiful live baby, and I found it, and it's mine." That was the way that my Tess came to me. As to where Tess came from, we had no way of knowing. Nothing but Tess and her bundle came ashore from the wreck, and what was left of the ship burrowed down into the sands. My finding the baby made a stir in the whole village, and everybody had to have a look at her. She was talking away at great rate, and my mother's heart quite breaking because her pretty chatter was all in heathen words that nobody could get at the meaning of. But the vicar, being very learned, understood her in a minute. "Why, it's Spanish," he said. "Do kindly ask her, sir, what her blessed little name is," said my mother. "I'll try her in Latin," said the vicar. "That's the best I can manage, and it'll be hit or miss if she understands," she being then a bit over 2 years old. For a minute there was a puzzled look in the big black eyes of her, and her brow puckered. And then she smiled all over her pretty face and answered as clear as you please, "Tessita." "It is a very good name indeed, Miss May," said the vicar, "only she's giving you her baby way of saying it. Her name is Teresa. Tessita is the same as our Tess would be." Whatever part of the world Tess came from, it was plain enough by the look of her, and more plain as she grew up into a tall, lanky girl, and then into a tall, slim woman, that Suffolk was a long way off from the land where she was born. Tess was unlike our girls in that she had a mighty hot spitfire temper of her own that would send everything scuttling before her, and then she would pull up suddenly in the thick of it and seem to forget all about it. Somehow, though, it was seldom that she let me have a turn of her tantrums. I used to just stand there and stare at her in her passions, and like enough be showing by the look in my eyes the puzzled sorrow that I was feeling in my inside. As to answering her anger with my anger, it never once crossed my mind. With John Heath, things went differently. he would go ugly when she flew out at him. Some trick that he played on her, I don't know what it was, set her in a rage against him, and he made her worse by laughing at her, and she ended up throwing sand in his eyes. Then his anger got up, and he caught her, being twice the size of her, and boxed her ears. I came along just then, and I could see the look of her now. She was not crying as an ordinary child would have been, John having meant to hurt her, and hit hard. She was standing straight in front of him with her little hands gripped into fists as if she meant to fight him. In another second or so she'd have been flying at him. I sailed right in myself. But after it was all over, what did Tess do but fall to crying because I'd hurt him, and to saying that he'd only given her what she deserved. For a week or more she would not speak to me, and all that time she was trotting about sorrowfully at John's heels, and seemed as though all of a sudden she had got to loving him, and I'm sure that his love for her had its beginning then too. Tess never had much to do with the other children, even when she got big enough to be with them at school, and she did not get along with them because she was quick about everything, and all of them were slow. When she began to grow up, though, matters changed a good deal. The boys, she being like nobody else in the village, picked her out, and that set the girls by the ears. And she didn't mind what the girls said to her because her wits were nimbler than their wits, and she always could give them better than they could send. So things went. Tess was turned of 17. All the village knew that Grace fancied John, and that he half fancied her, and would have fancied her altogether had Tess been out of the way. Making up his mind between them, John always was a thick thinker. Did not seem to come easy to him. Maybe he set too little store on Tess's love because it came to him too easily. Maybe he thought that by seeming to love her lightly, he could best hold her fast. Hold her fast he did. He had only to speak short and sharp to her, and she'd come to heel to him like a dog. Sometimes seeing her take orders from him that way was close to setting me wild, I having my whole heart fixed on her. But my pain was that the love which she had for me was the same sort of love she had for my mother, and so it cut me to the quick. Like enough, Grace Grice, being the same stock that I was, had the same feeling for Tess that I had for John. It was down by the boats under the gun hill that they fought the round out. A lot of the girls were together there, and Tess, for a wonder, happened to be with them. They all were saying to her what hard things they could think of, and she, in her quick way, was hitting back at them. "It's a pity I'm so many kinds of ugliness," said Tess in her saucy way, and making it worse by laughing. "It's a true pity I'm not pretty like the rest of you, and so am left lonely. If only I had some of your good looks, you see, I might have, as the rest of you have, a lot of men at my heels." That was a shot that hit all of them, but it hit Grace the hardest. Grace's slow anger had been getting hotter and hotter in her. "Who best thou to open thy ugly mouth to me?" she jerked out, with a squeak in her voice and her blue eyes blazing. "Because thou art not fit for John Heath or for any other honest man to have dealings with, thou rotten upcast of the sea." Tess was holding her head high and was scornful looking when this speech began, but the ending of it— "Mayhap now thou keep quiet a bit," Grace said, and with that, and a flounce at her, she turned away. When Tess came to breakfast the next morning, it gave me a real turn to look at her. Somehow she seemed to have changed from a girl to a woman, to an old woman at that. She just moped in a chair in a corner. In a way, of course, she had known what she was all her life long. My sea baby was my mother's pet name for her. How she had come to us, how I had found her where the waves had left her and carried her home in my little arms. She had been told over and over again. Her love was given to my mother and to my father and to me, too, though not in the way that I wanted it, and we were the true kinsfolk of her heart. on our side, we loved her so, and made her feel so truly that she was our very own, that the thought of being a nobody's child never had a chance to get into her mind. My heart was just breaking for her. After dinner, I went out to a bench in front of our house until the sun began to drop down toward the gun hill into a bad-looking yellow sky. At last, I saw Tess come out. She walked along the edge of the cliff to northward. At first, I didn't know what to do, thinking that if she wanted to be alone, I ought to leave her to her loneliness. But the longer I sat there, the stronger my drawing was to go to her. Hers was a hurt at having a husband would cure for her, seeing that she would get a new and good rating in the world when she got her husband's name. And so, at last I started after her to tell her all that was in my heart, and thinking more of what I could do to comfort her by taking the sting out of Grace Grice's words than of how, in the same way, I could win my own happiness. She was sitting at the cliff edge, bent forward a little, with her elbows on her knees and her face in her hands, crying. "Sit thee down, George. I'm glad thou'rt come," she said, and she reached out her hand to me. She had nothing to say for a bit, but just leaned her head against my shoulder and cried softly there. Tess was looking down, and after a while she said, "If only we could dig that ship up, George, we might find what would tell that I'm not come a foul folk, after all. It was good of thee, George," she went on again presently, "to save the baby life of me. But it's a true truth. Thou'd have done me more of a kindness hadst thou just thrown me back into the sea. I'd be resting there as I can't rest here, for down there my pain would be gone." My throat was so choked up that I had hard work to get the words out of it. "Thou'lt kill me dead, talking that way, as if the like of thee could come of foul folk. The sea gave thee to me, by right of finding thou'rt mine. From the first minute that I ever laid eyes on thee, I loved thee, and the only change in me has been that always I've loved thee more and more. Let me make thee the wife of me, Tess, and then thou'lt have no need to fret about who thy forebears were, for thou'lt have no more to do with them, being made a part of me and mine." "George," she said, "if I could be the wife of thee as thou'd have me be, I'd go down on my knees and thank God. But it can't be, George. It can't be. I've set my heart." "It's John that's between us?" I asked. "Yes," she said, speaking slow. "It's John. I don't understand it myself, George. Thou'rt a better-hearted man than he is, and I truly think I love him less than I do thee, but I love him in another way." "I love thee, Tess," I said, "but John has the hate of me, and I tell thee fairly, I'll hurt him if I can." With that, I left her. After a while, I turned back and looked. Tess was not alone. John was with her. I suppose that Tess being hurt that way for him brought John to his bearings, making him love her the more for sorrow's sake. Anyway, there he was, and I knew what he was saying to her as well as if I'd heard the words. I managed to pull myself together and turn again. What I had to settle with John Heath could be settled best when he and I were alone. When Tess came home to supper that night, she was all changed again, her looks gay once more, and her step light, and a sort of flutter about her lips, as if she was wanting to smile and was trying not to, and a soft look in her eyes that I had never seen there, but knew the meaning of, and found the worst of all. What I was after was to get some quiet time for myself that would steady me before I had things out with John. I was not clear in my mind how I meant to settle with him. Had I been in my sober senses that morning, I never should have gone away seaward at all. The look of the sea and the set of the ground swell told me plain enough that a change of wind was coming before midday, and that pretty soon after the wind shifted, it would be blowing a gale. When John got away in his boat, It was well past 8 o'clock, and there was no man on the beach to counsel him, and all being said, even a good sailor starting off to buy a wedding ring might not look as sharp as he ought. I, seeing the storm signals and knowing the meaning of them, have no more to say than that I was hot for a fight with anything that morning, and so I went on my course seaward until the coastline was lost, knowing well enough that the wind would lull and lull until it failed me, and that then I would get a blow out of the northeast that would give me all the fight I wanted, and perhaps a bit to spare. But because I meant my fight to be a good one, and I meant to win it, I got myself ready for it. I did not have to wait long. Out of the mist came the moaning that a strong wind makes when it's rushing down on you. There was no going back. Just as I was making ready for wearing, I glimpsed the sail of a boat in the mist. Then I saw that it was John Heath's boat, and that John was standing up alone at her helm. "I'm making for the wreck gap," he sung out. "Give me a lead-in, George. 'Tis better known to thee than to me." While the words were coming out of his mouth, it was all in my head like a flash. I saw my way to settling with him, and to settling fair. I'd be giving him a better chance than I had, because I'd be setting the course for him, and he'd have only to follow on. That either of us would pull through would be as it might be. As to my own chance, I was ready for it. As he dropped astern, and the up-tilt of his weather rail no longer hid the inside of his boat from me, I saw that there was a biggish bunch of something covered in a tarp in the stern sheets close by his feet, but I gave no thought to it. And so, as I grazed the sands, and after the graze went on safe again, my heart was light with the thought that I've got the better of him at last. There was no looking back to see what had gone with him. All my eyes were needed for my steering. And then, when I thought that I was fairly through and had safe water right ahead of me, there came a bang on the boat's side, as the sea trough took me down again, that near stove me, and right at the side of me, so close that I could have touched it as I lay for a second there in the deep wave hollow, was the stern post of Tess's sand-bedded ship, rising black out of the scum and foam. 1 foot further to leeward, and the jagged iron of it would have had me past praying for. But it did no harm to me. As the water covered it again, I shot on beyond it. Then I could use my eyes to look behind me, and what I saw will stay fixed in them till the copper pennies cover them. As I looked back, I saw only the bow of his boat, with the scrap of sail above it riding on the top of an oncoming wave. Then the boat tilted forward and came tearing down the wave front at a slant toward me, and I saw the whole length of her, and what burned my eyes out was seeing Tess there, standing, brave and steady, the 2 hands of her gripping fast the mast. With a sharp sound of wood splintering, the boat struck fair and full on the iron-set timber. And then the wave that had sent her there was playing with the scattered bits of her, and the sand-heavy breakers were tumbling about the bodies of the 2 that she had borne.